Thank you very much, Elizabeth. So welcome, everyone. I'm Olivier Crépin-Leblond. I'm the chair of the Dynamic Coalition on Core Internet Values. And I'm thrilled to see that there are quite a few people joining us today on this pretty interesting, hopefully pretty interesting panel of a star-studded panel, I think maybe we should call it, of participants that will be speaking to us about the characteristics what characteristics of IoT good practice and core internet values have contributed to the success of the internet and IoT to support a world living under COVID-19 lockdown? Shane, do you want to say a few words? I mean, the Dynamic Coalition on Core Internet Values is all has worked for many, many years to look at what some call the internet invariants, the characteristics that make the internet what it is, technical characteristics, should I say. Primarily things like being neutral, open, etc., distributed. There are a number of papers which are linked to the agenda page, the wiki agenda page, that if you're interested in the coalition, you can read. And if you want any information, further information, of course, you can email me quite easily. Shane, do you want to say a few words?
Yes. So we joined these two dynamic coalitions together last year in Berlin. The Dynamic Coalition on Internet of Things started in 2008. It had a lot of the actual papers that are available on the wiki will reflect things from 2016, and our values have really stayed steady, which is the idea around IoT that we need transparency, accountability. Building the privacy frameworks has been a more recent issue in the last 10 years, which has brought about the concern about future-proofing with IoT and the ability to monitor and question and educate people around legislation and regulation so they understand that when you're trying to secure IoT, it can happen in many different places along the ecosystem, in the not just at the open the box device level. But we had a very good long conversation about the need to blend core internet values with the ecosystem of IoT last year. I'm really looking forward to having a continued dialogue about it today.
That's great. Thank you for this. So, as I said earlier, we've got a number of panelists today to speak about this topic. And really, the topic was brought forth by a number of things. First, the fact that we've got COVID-19 that is touted everywhere as being the point of no return, where the old world ends and the new world starts, where life will never be the same anymore. And I'm not going to comment on it, whether that's the case or not, but it certainly is the case that we have, well, COVID-19 has had quite a number of effects on the internet as a whole, if only just because of the fact that everyone has worked a lot more from home, and also use the internet when you're in furlough or you're off work, or use the internet for a lot more entertainment resources, watching, streaming, etc., etc. So there's been quite some load on the net as it is. And I think we might draw some conclusions from that. Second, of course, there's also been there's always some discussion going on out there about whether the internet is fit for purpose or whether it's all technology that needs to be replaced. And ever since its very beginning, and I can remember the late 80s, or even early 90s, when there was this whole thing about the information superhighway, there was already a debate back then on whether one would use the internet or you needed to build a brand new information superhighway that would maybe be internet-like or maybe not, but at least be a lot faster than what we had back then. Big discussion that we have now, because up to now there have been a lot of proposals coming out, and one of the recent proposals that we've seen has come from Huawei, and unfortunately they weren't able to join us today, but Huawei sent a proposal over to one of the ITU working groups for Internet 2030, their vision of the internet 10 years from now. And one might think, well, you know, it's a long time away, it's 2030. I remember what we were talking about in 2010, which doesn't seem to be that long ago. And some of the predictions that we made back then, yeah, okay, forget the predictions. But the whole point was that the paper which was proposed there showed that maybe the internet would change a lot and was somehow a lot of things needed to be changed and something new had to be designed. So we're not looking at building or evolving what we have today, but perhaps changing things and having a brand new network to support it. There's some people who know a lot more about this on this call, so we'll be able to discuss maybe a little bit of this. There's also an ETSI group that has started work on a new internet, and of course it's a follow-up. It's not something that's just come out of the woodwork like this and said, hey, there you go, a new group. So there's always some work going on, and it might well be that we're dealing with parallel networks, with the overlay with work that takes place in parallel and an evolution somehow moving on. But the big question with that is, how does the governance of all this evolve? The internet was built around a multi-stakeholder model of governance. What about the future? Is any future network or is any evolution of this network going to continue following on the same type of governance model? Now, with this as a starting point, we've got a number of key participants and panelists joining us, and I'll go through them in alphabetical order. We first have Paul Blaker, who's the head of global internet governance at DCMS. That's the UK government. DCMS has been involved a lot in both the ICANN arena with domain names and has people on the GAC, the Government Advisory Council, Advisory Committee, sorry. And then you've got also people from DCMS in the ITU processes, the WSIS, the all of the things that are taking place over in Geneva. So Paul is going to be able to provide us with an insight on the positions that the UK has taken over the years on these issues. Vint Cerf, and I hope that he's able to join us. Hopefully he's on the call now. Well, does he need an introduction? Chief Internet Evangelist at Google. He's had an illustrious career. One of the things that he's done, small thing that he's done, was to invent TCP/IP, or co-invent TCP/IP with Bob Kahn. And so this is really the basic protocol on which much of what we see today is based. And therefore, he's been credited as being one of the fathers of the internet. David Conrad is the Chief Technical Officer of ICANN. And ICANN, as you know, is the organization that that coordinates the internet's identifier system, primarily domain names. So one of the reasons why David is here today is because the ICANN has responded directly to the points that were made in the new IP paper by Huawei. So he'll be able to share some views on the addressing side of things, I guess, and maybe others. I know that David has an illustrious career as well. John Grant, thank you for joining us, is the chair of the non-IP networking group at ETSI. So that's potentially one of the groups that will come up with the next internet. So it's great to see you here, John, and I hope that we'll get a good insight of what this group is about and how this group is going to work. Marco Hogewoning is from RIPE. He's the senior external relations officer for RIPE NCC. Marco has been the drafter of and his team, of course, has been the drafter of the response from RIPE and the comment from RIPE regarding the new IP paper. And Marco is very much involved with all the issues of internet governance as they stand today. Olaf Kolkman, Principal for Internet Technology, Policy and Advocacy at the Internet Society. And here, Olaf has been the drafter or the main drafter of the paper that the Internet Society has published regarding new IP. And then finally, and that's just alphabetically, Anthony Rutkowski, Principal at Netmagic Associates. And Anthony has been a long-term internet veteran, has worked on a lot of things at the ITU and all of that sphere, 5G as well, and knows a lot, and is based, basically has written a number of articles on Circle ID, which are linked actually, and they're thought-provoking articles linked over to our agenda. You'll notice they're all men, some of them with white beards, some of them not. It's just unfortunate that they all are, but we thought on this occasion we'd need to get the people that actually were directly involved with drafting and writing the things that are at the core of our discussion today. And so they're particularly hands-on. So Shane, you're going to have to hold the flag for gender equality here, and I should, I guess, give you the floor more often than all of these guys on this call. So thanks, and we'll start, I guess, with the first of our questions. And the way that we're going to do, okay, editor, Olaf, thank you for telling me, editor, not main drafter. Fine.
It's still a very important thing to be doing. Editing sometimes more so than drafting.
Sometimes editing means rewriting everybody else's work, but you don't say that you're an actual author. It's actually much nicer to do it this way, some would say. So we've got several questions, I guess, which are on the cards, but hopefully we can get this into a real dialogue rather than me just going on and on about things. And the first question that we were going to ask, the main thing is, well, we've got COVID-19 and we've got all these changes that happen in the past 6 months in the world where we thought things were just a smooth sailing, and it obviously is not quite smooth sailing for, well, everyone, I guess. Is the internet fit for purpose in 2020? And I think that as a starting point, we could probably get Tony to talk to us about this. And I think Tony's got a slide on that, and that's the only slide that we have on this. So Elizabeth, I don't know who's in charge of the slides. If they can put the first slide on the screen, that would be great.
Well, Tony, why don't you go ahead and get started while we wait for Elizabeth?
Yeah, go and get started.
Sure. I see there's symmetry, Shane. I guess that looks like a Asian/Chinese.
It's Japan.
Japan. And behind me is basically modern, all the Tibetan.
It looks like a lot of modern technology and books behind you.
Oh, well, there should be, it's mainly Tibetan. Anyhow, let me run through the slide and say as a preface, I think one of the challenges here is as we discussed a bit on the email, is I think some of us live in very different worlds. And I certainly don't live in, I suspect most of the worlds, at least today, that most of the people in this panel are. Good. So
you're adding a diverse point of view. Thanks, Tony.
Right. Okay. So my answer to the first question, I tried to articulate this, is our existing ICT infrastructure, especially the GSM global network, has served the world reasonably well during the pandemic. And I would note that Europe taking the lead for the related global coordination development of needed capabilities in the new E4P industry standards group is really quite helpful. I think DCMS has actually been involved in that, but it's been extremely active, and I think it's one of a kind venue for coordinating amongst all the different other activities ongoing, which seems to be a bit chaotic. Sort of running down the list, then the term internet is it's certainly in my experience and is without meaning. And it's used essentially for political polemics and marketing purposes. As subnotes, the use of IP protocols, there have been really countless internet protocol variants over the decades that have been manifested in vendor and provider implementations and diverse industry forums. And I tried to capture a lot of those in the Circle ID article on the history, with lots of links in there. And the topic of new protocols became especially prominent in multiple 3GPP ETSI MEF groups over the past 5 years with the emergence of virtualized architectures and protocols. the quest for low latency connectivity. By the way, I think the name of the company that's being referenced is pronounced Huawei, and I feel a little bit. I think the way their work and activity is being portrayed is rather egregious, but I realize it's all part of the kind of political dialogue. And the ITU-T, like most industry venues, has seen many similar work item proposals as Huawei put forward, and often reflecting there's a kind of a common template to Larry Roberts' pioneering new protocol proposal in 2006, which was actually backed by BT. So my admonition, I'm not sure how we bridge these kind of parallel universes, is that focus should be to understand the meta developments underway that are now shaping the evolution of network architectures and their services. I try to point some of those out in the next slide when we get to that question. Given this diversity and I think for lack of a better term, sneak holes between these black holes between the universes. That may be about the best we can do for the moment. So anyhow, that's my initial set of comments to this one.
Thanks for this, Tony. Next, and I don't think that Vint has made it yet. So next in the list would be David Conrad, who, I guess I can give the floor over to him on your thoughts on this. Is the internet fit for purpose today? DNS, everything else?
So thank you, Olivier, and thanks for being asked to participate in the panel. To answer the specific question, is the internet fit for purpose in 2020? I mean, it would seem to be obvious that the answer would be yes, because just the fact that I'm speaking on this Zoom call would suggest that the internet, as you may define it, has succeeded in providing a global telecommunications infrastructure upon which, increasingly people rely, and upon which GDP becomes more and more dependent. It's used for pretty much everything. There are corner cases in which the core protocols of the internet, and specifically IP, may not be ideal, but economies of scale are what sort of drives things on the internet these days. And those corner cases may be useful in identifying, specific variants of protocols or completely alternative protocols that meet those corner cases. But ultimately, the ability of the internet to be a globe-spanning telecommunications network in 2020 appears to be without question. I think there are aspects of how the internet has been deployed that, if nothing else, COVID-19 has shown may need some adjustment. Things like asymmetric bandwidth, where the upstream is much less than the downstream, could be seen as being, problematic when you're doing, peer-to-peer video across, multiple clients. There are other aspects of the technologies that are clearly in need of work. Security, particularly in the IoT context, would be an ideal example. But in 2020, is the internet fit for purpose? I have trouble coming up with an argument that would argue against that. So I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks for this, David. Next, we have John Grant from ETSI, and as I said earlier, John is leading a group that is ultimately going to design something or standards for non-IP networking. John, is the internet as it is today fit for purpose?
Well, we've got nearly half an hour through this call without too many things dropping out. So it's doing a lot better today than it has done recently. Yeah, sorry, I wasn't expecting to be on until the end. So you sort of caught me a little on the hop because I was waiting to hear what everyone else had to say. Yeah, I mean, we've NIN follows on from NGP. NGP was looking at particularly some issues that mobile operators had with the way that IP works. And I suppose if you go right back in the history, there's kind of tenets with IP that I've never believed, right back from when I started doing networking in 1981. But without too much going into the religion of it, there's the problem is that, you know, we had the telecom system that would do voice, and you know, I mean, I'm old enough to remember analog exchanges where you got noise like someone frying sausages because the contacts weren't quite clean. And then we moved to digital, and then it was all kind of beautiful. And then we moved to IP, and everything started getting compressed, and there were extra delays and stuff. Yeah, a lot of my history is in video, and particularly audio, where you, as I remember someone saying in one of the meetings, media networks have requirements that IT folks don't understand. And IP is very much an IT system, and we're using it more and more for media streams, you know, as we're using it now. The other problem that NGP came up with was there were quite large overheads, and while that doesn't matter too much on cable, when you've paid a lot of money for spectrum, you kind of need to get value for the bits that go over the ether. I guess that's my 2 minutes.
Thanks for this, John. And yes, apologies. I was supposed to leave you until the end. I just jumped. But next time, in the next one, we'll follow the right order. Next is Marco Hogewoning. And Marco with RIPE, as I said earlier, drafted or probably edited some of the response to the new IP. But of course, RIPE distributes IP addresses. So a world without IP. Marco.
Yeah, a world without IP. We could have run several what-if scenarios, but sort of looking at sort of the question, is the internet today in 2020 fit for purpose? I think we have to also consider that we didn't design it this way. We never considered a global pandemic of this scale when we thought out TCP IP or when we built those networks. I bet when you ordered your internet connection last year, you also did not consider sort of being stuck at home for multiple weeks trying to do everything remote. None of us did. Yet, if you then look at for whatever the internet is and what it means, and I'm kind of a bit reluctant to define the internet based on the actual protocol being used. After all, there is already like 2 protocols in use on the common internet, and maybe more to follow or different alternatives. But in the end, if you consider the core values of this being a flexible and adaptable system that quickly scales up, it exactly did what it said on the box. We told everybody to work from home, and okay, here and there a few hiccups, but mostly it worked. And that also, while thinking about this and reflecting back, is it like, yeah, would another network, or would one of those older network designs that have now disappeared served us this well in similar fashion and trying to connect? Would that have scaled up? So yeah, I come from an internet background. I've been basically working with internet all my life. I think it especially with this COVID, with this global pandemic, it shows what a marvelous system has evolved over the last 40 years with all of our help and with all the tweaks that we can do. Looking for the future, are there things to improve? There are certainly lessons to be learned from COVID. Looking at core internet values, what for me are core internet values, and then principal things are security by design, privacy by design. We can probably look back at the last few weeks and see how that sort of worked. And I think that's probably also the best way to reflect back. Is what we understand the internet, and is what we understand the core or what you see as the core values of the internet, and see how those interacted with the current pandemic and how they helped the internet to scale and morph and be flexible enough to adopt this. In that sense, without those principles, would it still have worked? And I think that's the way to approach this, rather than should we change anything? Think about it like, okay, what if we would have a different system? What if we would have less of a permissionless innovation? What if this system would be more rigid with a couple of global dominant players? The fact is that we now choose Zoom. We could have taken 5 other platforms to have this meeting. And I think that's the core value, the principle, that openness, that modularity is what saved us here. I'll leave it with that as an opening.
Thanks very much for this, Marco. And it's interesting because, yes, we do have the choice, but often everyone follows the choice of everyone else, and you end up with these conglomerates.
It's called the network effect, I believe.
Exactly, the network effect, strangely enough. All right, next in our list of speakers, and I understand Vint is on his way. He was in the wrong room, and he's been sent to the right room, and this happens because I did the same mistake. Next is Paul Blaker, and Paul with the UK government. Is the internet as it is today fit for purpose, given all the things that we've had to go through in the first half of this year?
Hi, thank you. Yes, I think, as others have said, the short answer must be yes, it is fit for purpose, but it's fit for purpose for those of us who have access to it, of course. I really see how COVID-19 is changing how people think about the internet. We're all depending on it for public health advice, public services, business, just social well-being. Whereas in the past, maybe the internet and digital technology might have been a bit of a special interest topic within government or within public policy debates. It's now absolutely front and center of attention for senior decision makers in government. And I think it's shown an even stronger argument of why we need to think very, very carefully about the impacts before discussing radical changes to the internet and how it works. I think COVID has shown there are clearly challenges, particularly around the potential for DNS abuse, and we need to take steps to address those. But by and large, networks have met huge increases in demand, and so many of us have been relying on the internet. Those of us, as I say, who have access to it, and I would make this point particularly that in the kind of international debates I follow, whether at the UN or the ITU or CSTD, I do think that COVID-19 has refocused attention on the fact that nearly half the world's population is still unconnected. We've had a lot of debate in recent years about emerging technology, and it's important that we discuss the issues that new technology brings. But I think the pandemic has reminded us of the fundamental and critical need to connect the unconnected and ensure there is affordable access globally. That work has been going on for a long time, of course. It may not always be exciting or new, supporting investments, building infrastructure, capacity, better regulation, those kind of bread and butter issues. But I do think COVID-19 has brought that right back to the center of attention, and that's a good thing. Thanks.
Thanks very much for these thoughts. And I think we can swiftly then go to Olaf Kolkman from the Internet Society.
Yeah, it's going to be a little bit of a repetition of what everybody else said, I'm afraid, or most of you said. I first want to say a little bit about how I think about the internet, because I do think that is important in this context. It's not a marketing term. It's actually a technology and an idea that is important, that brings us global connectivity and a lot of possibility. And for me, in essence, it's a network of network that in which the individual networks can make individual decisions about how they do their business, how they provision their customers, how they ship traffic around, all those type of good things. And I think we come to talk about that in the next part of the questions. But at the same time, all participants have an interest in keeping that global connectivity going. Subscribers, access miles, backbone network providers, internet exchange point, content delivery networks, application platform, content providers, those are all similar, all active actors that provide the services that we collectively depend on. When we looked at when COVID took on, obviously at the Internet Society, we asked the question, this is going to change how people use the internet, and what will be the impact? Will the internet fail? That was a question in the first week of the COVID crisis. We have been tracking that quite a lot. My colleague David Belson has written a few blog posts about this. And what we basically see is that most networks have been under stress. Doesn't really matter which type of networks, but most have been under stress. And the stress that they were under was the type of stress they saw with new iOS releases, new gaming releases, hot new Netflix type of thing. So high capacity type of simultaneous events that sort of became the new normal. Most of the networks are well provisioned to deal with that. Backbone provider, internet exchange point, content delivery networks, application platforms, they had the overhead and could fairly easily scale up, is what we've seen. The access networks, as Paul said, the access networks got the hits. And specifically the hits, the networks where the access was already limited. Oftentimes 20 to 30%, sometimes a factor of 100%, factor 2 of upscaling, which basically brought download speeds down significantly. Now that happened in the places where under provisioning was already happening. In the rural parts of developed nations, where there is often little competition, we saw this, but also in developing nations. And obviously, that's the big tragedy that Paul was referring to. The people who are least connected in this crisis were also the people who were not able to do homeschooling, who were not able to work from home, and for whom this crisis was most possibly the most impactful. So yeah, I would say that the internet has shown that it worked, but it has also exposed that there is still lots to do. And I think we will be talking about that in the second question of this panel.
Thanks for this, Olaf. And you should have a look at the chat because Tony doesn't quite agree with the points you've put forward. So there's going to be some good discussion later on that. Next on our list, we have well, first I was going to check if Vince has made it, but I don't think he's made it yet. So next we've got...
It is virtually stuck in the other room. I'm sure they probably wanted to keep him.
There. Okay. Well, it says John Grant, but of course, John, you've already had your say, but maybe you could just say a couple of words, I guess, in response to what you've heard.
Yeah, if I can find the unmute button. Yeah, no, I mean, I think there wasn't anything there that I violently disagree with or anything.
Great. So I guess the internet, from what I've heard, most people said it is fit for purpose. The question now is the next 10.
Well, I mean, obviously, you know, things like audio quality and so on can be improved, and that's what we're working on. But yeah, you know, the basic things we use the internet for, that does seem to work.
Gaming, email, web surfing.
Yeah, I would think gaming could do with a bit of work on latency as well. But it's not something I mean, I don't play online games, so it's not on my radar. But yeah, I mean, being able to find information and that kind of thing, it works well.
Well, okay, so let's look now at the next 10 years. And I guess the question there is with the new IP proposal, which comes up with a more, I guess, modern technical alternative supporting better IoT, 5G, etc., because we do have to think that these are just around the corner. IoT, and Shane might be able to tell us a little more about that in a moment. 5G being very, very different from what we used to with some of the services that need extremely low latency. You know, we've got this technology that's out there. Is this compatible with what we have so far? Are we dealing with what's been said as parallel worlds? Could we have parallel worlds with these holes that go from one to the other? And then what about the internet's governing model that we currently have? How is that compatible with the future? And will that be preserved, or will that have to evolve as well? Again, let's start with Tony Rutkowski.
I was typing.
You want to take your information on chat go real time with it?
Well, I don't know. Some of
in the
this
chat
is,
if anybody wants to read it. There
I mean,
go.
some of this is just, you know, it's a bit surreal because, you know, I think we basically exist in very different worlds.
What do you mean by that? I don't understand what you mean by that.
Well, one of my suggestions is, you know, basically go to Security Week, which is ongoing right now at ETSI. It's having its own set of presentations like this. And you will hear none of this dialogue, and they will be dealing with basically a kind of multitude of protocols and the gateway problems. It's the commercial, and it's a kind of a massive commercial mobile, you know, world of other venues and protocols and platforms.
But isn't that just a parallel? It's not necessarily a different universe. It's a parallel universe, because while those decisions are being made, there are things that are being layered upon it.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways. And in fact, the 5G model, in many ways, tries to capture that. They incorporated NFV and the SDN as the underlying platform, and there's basically a bifurcated instantiation of architectures and protocols underlying layer, and then you have services on top of that. And then they're holding, you know, there's massive 3G meetings with, you know, thousands of people and thousands of contributions occurring almost every month. and that's what sort of the world's going forward with. Meanwhile, my sense is you guys sort of exist in your own little universe.
Maybe people are in their parallel swim lanes. We're very appreciative of the work that's going on. I don't know that we're ignoring it. I think we're very thankful for it.
Well, or vice versa. There's sneak paths between them in terms of some of the liaison statements, but by and large, the constructs, the mindsets are just entirely different. No one would have this kind of a dialogue in if you will, that industry universe. I would actually note that, as some of the older folks do, that we had many internet protocols at one time. In fact, they were supposed to converge on CLMP, circa 1992, and that didn't happen. Instead, there was some convergence nominally on some TCP/IP, on the TCP/IP platform. My sense is that's sort of what it's in the process. It has been coming apart. It will continue to come apart in future years.
So I want to bring up one thing you noted here in the chat is that there's a lot of people in the world that are still using DSL. And this question is about, we've gone through, are we fit for purpose? But as we're going through to support in 2030, these groups that you're talking about, are they helping us get to the next phase more rapidly? Are we leapfrogging? What's important about the work they're doing?
Well, I think the DSL stuff, which is basically the ISDN chipsets turned out strapped together and used for wireline, is out there, and everyone's trying to kind of leapfrog that with the 5G efforts, and that's pretty massive. I mean, if you look at 3GPP, probably about 80% of all the activities on the RAN side, and then most of that's going back and forth to the ITU through the IMT 2020 stuff and ITUR. So I mean, that's all ongoing, and then of course you've got the satellite folks coming. I guess we had something like 300 Starlink satellites put up by Musk yesterday. So it's kind of fascinating how it's evolving, and it's everyone kind of builds on each other's stuff. But there are these other worlds that are moving forward with alternative technologies and platforms. Cool.
Hey, John, bringing you into this discussion, it sounds like you are a little disappointed that people have been so happy to take latency. And I kind of think like if I were going to be stuck somewhere with COVID, I'd like to be with an audio file, and they would be way ahead on the equipment we have going on. But so going towards the question of what we should be putting ourselves on the path of 2030, do you want to make some comments and add anything that Tony said?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, certainly. Audio people notice things that other people don't notice, and human beings are amazingly adaptable. And although in a natural conversation, a few milliseconds actually matters, we learn to live with delays of hundreds of milliseconds, and somehow just about manage to still have proper
Some people only hear what they want to hear too, so that helps.
Yeah, it probably does. I mean, specifically about the new IP proposals, because as I said, there was this previous group in ETSI called Next Generation Protocols, and basically that separated out into the ones who wanted to add more stuff onto IP, and the ones who said that you've added far too much already and it's just getting unwieldy and we need to kind of start again and do it properly this time. And
is that an option?
Well, we think we're seeing a route to that because with private networks, mobile operators are actually doing quite a lot of private networks. I was in a call yesterday with where we were hearing about, or was it Felixstowe Docks, for instance, where there is a mobile network that is just for them. And those kind of networks have requirements, like particularly for latency, or when it's IoT type things where you need to worry about battery life, and the gain of what we have in NIN is enough, and the barriers are much less when it's private network, because it doesn't have to be a 3GPP standard, and so we're being told that provided and as it is, it's very much compatible, so we can carry things that have IP addresses. It's just we can also carry things that have other kinds of addresses. We can carry very low latency live media, and we can also carry traditional packet data. But one of the requirements on NGP was to get the size of packet headers down, and in NIN we've done that. The new IP people seem to have gone the other way. Their packets not only have all of an IP header, but a heap of other stuff as well. So there's kind of a difference in beliefs there, but we think that we're following the requirements of the operators.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think what you're saying is we're asking for the space to be utilized so we actually get more things done in the space. I'm curious to have the group address this new IP proposal, where it seems to be more interested in direction than actually putting more availability into application. David, you're next on the list. I don't know if you want to be our lead into the new IP, or if you have something else you want to comment on this conversation about going towards 2030.
With regards to new IP, we are, ICANN, my group within ICANN is undertaking a study trying to understand what exactly it is. One of the challenges with new IP is that the technical specifications for it are somewhat hard to find. And when you look at the, I'm sorry?
You would think that would be important.
Yeah, and when you look at the information that is available, the answers that you get depend a lot on who is actually speaking about the actual protocol. So the first focus for us is to actually understand what exactly new IP represents in terms of bits on the wire, in terms of functionality that new IP actually provides that IP cannot. Why would you try to replace a global spanning infrastructure, with something new and untested, if you don't actually understand why the old stuff isn't able to meet your use cases? So that's an ongoing study that we're undertaking within ICANN. With regards to the internet in 2030. I guess part of the issue is, what do you mean by the internet, right? As Tony has pointed out, the internet has evolved over time. I would probably disagree with his interpretation of variants of IP or the internet. I guess it depends on what you mean by internet. I think that ultimately, part of this discussion seems to be a bit surreal to me, as Tony has noted, but in a different way. By analogy, Formula One cars actually go really, really fast, but you're not going to see Formula One cars being used as family cars, right? The internet is all about scale and network effect. When you have an environment that is trying to address 7 billion people, in order to transition into something new, you have to have a good business case. You have to have requirements that cannot be met, however poorly, using the existing technologies, something that we've discovered as we tried to transition from IPv4 to IPv6. IPv4 works reasonably well. IPv6 is better in a lot of ways, but there wasn't sufficient justification for a lot of folks to actually move over to it. So, if you're talking new IP or you're talking about specific corner cases that the internet protocols are not able to meet, you have a huge hurdle that you have to jump over in order to actually see the significant deployment that would make it a globe spanning infrastructure. 2030 is 10 years away. In 2010, how is the internet different then than it is today? Largely, we're seeing more of the same. We're seeing, new applications built on top of the neck of the hourglass. But the underlying foundational technology, seems to be good enough and seems to meet enough of the fundamental requirements that it continues to be used. That's not to say that it's perfect. That's not to say it can't be improved. It's not to say that I think it's ideal. It certainly isn't. But the technology itself, I don't see the business case, the justification, the use cases that would result in a fundamental change of the underlying technologies. But then again, my crystal ball is notoriously cracked.
Olaf, do you want to add some thoughts to that?
Yeah, being a little bit at the end of the queue makes everybody else steal your thunder a little bit. But yeah, no, I think that's right. I am known to have a very bad crystal ball. I would say that if you look at the internet, it's the agility and the generativity that it offers that makes the internet as a global infrastructure something that people have learned to rely on. The fact that you can just add a network at the edge and be part of the bigger thing without having to buy yourself in is important. The fact that you can build an application somewhere in the long tail, the fact that you can do that without having to buy yourself in is important. If you go to a world where every service has its own, in the extreme, every service has its own type of, network optimization, then you also are in a world where you have to buy yourself into the optimization. So that's something to think about. If I think about new IP or just other internet protocols, other network protocols, the beauty about the internet is that it's a network of networks, and everybody is allowed to build the network they want based on the technology that they want. However, if you want to have global interoperability, IP is that little dying thing. Whether we can change IP to something else, it's a question. It's you have to fight the current network effects. I don't know how that works, but something to consider. You have to have that story. If it comes to quality of service, the things that Tony is talking about, quality of service in the data center, network virtualization, software-defined networks, 5G slices, all these type of things where there are very specific, a factory floor with 500 robots that shouldn't collide into each other and that need to be real-time trimmed. Of course, you have a different protocol on your 5G slice for that. I can completely get that. So there's many good arguments why you need something different than IP in some environments, but that doesn't argue for a global replacement. One of the things that I, for instance, see in many of these proposals is arguments for, or questions, requirements for QoS. And I do not know how you do global QoS, how you do QoS over networks that do not necessarily have a direct business relationship. The beauty about the current internet is that you can connect as a network. Freedom.nl is a ISP that got established last month in the Netherlands. New ISP in the Netherlands. They attach to a few neighbors at the M6, and they don't have to go through a gigantic long type of negotiation to talk with any other of the 60,000 networks in the world. If you want QoS, my question is, how do you regulate the governance around QoS on a global basis? That needs other governance mechanisms, and those governance mechanisms, are going to be tricky. They're international. There will be all kinds of things that need to be considered and thought of. And then the other point about QoS is obviously it's not necessarily a technical thing. It's a business thing. If businesses had invested in access networks, we wouldn't have the problems today of people not being able to do their Zoom calls and do their work and go to school remotely. That's a business thing. It's getting a competitive price. It's getting competition in the market. All those type of things that make the access market, viable and healthy, which you see in some in some environments and you don't see in other environments. Those are business and investment questions. So when I think about these considerations, then I immediately think that these new kinds of protocols also bring all kinds of questions about QoS. QoS comes with control. Which traffic do you prioritize over other traffic? How do you manage all that? And those bring all kinds of internet governance or governance problems to the table that need to be discussed. And that's something that I hardly ever hear.
Yeah, I think of permissionless innovation when you talk about many of those things, and the idea of the ability to connect without having to have permission to connect, which I want to move over to Marco. You had a piece on the RIPE blog just talking about the new IP, and I actually want to go back to what you said during Olivier's section where you said it works. What we're doing works, and I think David was pointing that out as well. And looking at why are we looking at changing up something that works very well? So if you wouldn't mind making some comments about the new IP as you've elegantly stated on your blog,
I'm a bit with with some of the other speakers here, and that not in particular about new IP. There are others, and I'm probably one of the first to agree that there are use cases where IP and David also kind of like that, where IP is probably not as efficient as you want it to be, where it's not fit for purpose, which is fine. I mean, I think in that sense also where you see the IoT venture into, we have these ragged edges at the internet where you can take a different protocol that is better fit for purpose and either translate it back into IP where you need long haul transmission or use IP to transport your data. We see that with many IoT networks where they simply use IP as the ubiquitous form of connectivity to do their own thing across it. Which is perfectly fine, but I think, and that's kind of the point that David made and a couple of other speakers is one size fits nobody, and that goes for IP as well as for new IP or whatever other protocol. And I think that's the part that we need to understand is that sure, there are use cases where you probably don't want to use IP, and I've given presentations in the past as well. It's like, I can't imagine that sort of your modern self-driving car approaching a traffic light. I can't see that work on IP. That's probably there's much more efficient ways to do that than using the TCP/IP protocol as we know it right now, which is perfectly fine. Because I also don't really see a purpose for that to be part of what we then call the internet capital I, the stuff we currently use. And with that, I think also I want to jump back a bit on what was said earlier. It is about this dialogue. It is about understanding what you need. And what strikes me most is that a lot of people then suggest like, oh yeah, TCP/IP is not fit for purpose because it doesn't compensate, or it doesn't accommodate my use case. But now I'm going to redesign everything top to bottom, because I honestly believe that there is a one size fits all, and I don't think that's not reality. And if you then look at the rationale, and there's been a lot of sort of people reflecting back in the last 30 years in this session as well, which is easy to do. But looking forward 10 years, and as I said in my opening, we never expected this global pandemic. We didn't see it coming. Not in 2010, not in 2019, probably not even in January. And here we are, people saying, this is what the world is going to look like in 2030. And I'm going to build a network that will accommodate that world that I think will exist in 2030. As Olaf already said, like, I don't think we have a working glass ball yet. So with that in mind, sure, we can talk about where we can improve IP. Sure, there might be cases where we think another protocol fits better, which kind of brings me to our main argument that we brought into new IP. It's and back to sort of also the session's topic on core values. It is fine if you want to develop another protocol, but I do believe that these kind of dialogues help. And I do believe that transparency helps. And I do believe that bottom-up decision-making helps with all stakeholders involved. I don't think the solution is to lock yourself in a room and say like, oh, I'm going to ignore that world and I'm going to be in my world and I'm going to have none of this discussion and redesign everything from scratch.
I'm sure there's a lot of people, if they were locked in a room, would try to go for perfect. And we deal with a lot of very good. So we're lucky. Paul, I want to bring you in. One of the things that we have not gotten to in this part of the discussion is the actual governance of going towards 2030. So if you want to comment about how all of this technology flows into our challenges with internet governance and global IP.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I think just to start with, just to recognize what Olaf and others were saying about the internet currently is built as a distributed network with a modular architecture using a suite of technologies which have been developed and importantly, they are governed from the bottom up. And it's these characteristics actually that have allowed the internet to grow and develop, and they underpin the resilience of the internet even when under heavy stress or attack. So it's clear to us that the internet, of course, must continue to evolve, continue to develop in order to meet who knows what kind of new technologies, applications and services are going to come down the track in 10 years' time. But those characteristics of an open distributed network will continue to be crucial to the future success of the internet. And speaking from a government point of view around the governance of this, it's very much the UK view, I think, shared with other European countries, that evolution of the internet should be developed in a way which is open, inclusive and multi-stakeholder, and which takes into account contributions and perspectives from different technical, industry and other stakeholders. So as a government, we have some serious concerns about the new IP proposal, as we understand it at least, at the ITU. Concerns around interoperability, and resilience on the internet and the potential for centralizing control. Concerns around the fact that the work at the ITU seems to duplicate work which is going on in other standards development organizations. And also, I think a concern that others have raised that deploying a new IP could lead to enormous costs, enormous disruption and potential for fragmentation. Plus, I don't need to say, we still need to accelerate deployment of IPv6 before we start talking about a new internet protocol. So there's a whole range of concerns there, but perhaps even more fundamentally, in terms of governance, we don't think that an intergovernmental organization like the ITU is the right place for the evolution of the internet's architecture. It's the IETF, which has successfully driven the internet over many years. Now, I don't think anyone would say the IETF is a perfect organization, but it certainly has the necessary open, inclusive, and industry-led approach that the ITU doesn't. Of course, that puts an obligation on the IETF and the folks who go there to make sure that it's addressing the issues for the future effectively in an inclusive way. And it takes account of some of the policy issues and some of the longer term impacts and consequences of its work in a responsible way. And I see that tomorrow in Eurodig, in fact, there's quite an interesting session on the relationship between standards development and policy. So that looks like a really good one to attend tomorrow. But as a government, as the UK, I think we're clear the internet has already evolved and grown successfully over the years. We want it to continue to develop, but based on the characteristics and the organizations and the structures that have allowed it to flourish so successfully so far.
Great, thank you. Olivia, I'm going to bring it over to you, and hopefully Vint has had time to catch up on the conversation now that he's joined us.
That's correct. Yes, the main culprit to bring us here, TCP/IP. Vint, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I apologize, everyone. I wasn't quite sure of the protocol to get into the right room, and I ended up in the room with Roberto Gaetano and found it so interesting I didn't pay attention to the fact that I wasn't where I should be, so apologies for that. I did catch the last 10 minutes or so, and I have a few observations to make. The first one is that...
Sorry, did you catch the note in Tony Rutkowski?
Happy birthday.
Sorry?
Did you catch the notes on Tony's screen? I don't know whether you...
Yes, I've been watching the chat, but I haven't seen any presentation.
Okay. All right.
So just to come back to a couple of observations. The first one is that the internet architecture has shown itself to be pretty open. It certainly has accommodated a variety of new protocol developments, even most recently, like the QUIC development at Google, which collapsed together TCP and TLS with more rapid recovery from failure of the separation of the two endpoints, but also allowed for flow control in multiple channels within one quick connection. So the only reason I bring this up is not to try to sell something developed by Google, but to observe that the processes by which standards are made in the IETF and the architecture of the internet enabled these kinds of evolutions to happen. I think the point is also well made that internet has managed to evolve over the 45 years or so that it's been in existence, in concept, and now in operation. And it has absorbed new technologies to allow it to offer higher capacity. We couldn't do what we're doing right now were it not for the fact that we have a lot of optical fiber, we have a lot of high-speed radio capability, and we can see more coming over time. So with regard to the new IP, there's nothing wrong with saying, I would like to achieve certain capabilities, and I don't believe the existing system can accommodate them, and to lay out what those objectives might look like. And it almost doesn't matter where you choose to lay out the desirable properties that you're looking for. It's something else, however, to go figure out how to actually do that. And it's another thing to ask whether you have to start all over from scratch or whether you can achieve the properties that you're looking for by evolving the existing system. And I would argue that we have a great deal of evidence that the system we have right now is evolvable, although the point that was made on the chat that we're only a third of the way through with IPv6 is truly a frustrating observation, and one which I hope that somehow we'll be able to overcome, especially now with the pandemic in place, with all of the impact of social distancing and people working from home, it's forcing the internet to provide for more symmetric capacity so we can have video in both directions. And it's also driving a very interesting other thing. Everyone here knows about the Internet of Things, and we know lots of devices are becoming internet enabled. We also know that creates all kinds of risk factors. But I wanted to bring up a personal experience with COVID-19, which leads me to an Internet of Medical Things conclusion. When I wanted to see the doctor, they said, "We don't want to see you." And my reaction was, "What do you mean? That's what medicine is about." And they said, "We're afraid you're going to infect us, and we don't have proper protection. So we'll be happy to have a video conference with you." And my first reaction was, "Well, that doesn't sound very satisfying because you won't take my temperature, my blood pressure, my pulse, and all the other things." And it dawned on me that that was an invitation to invent an Internet of Medical Things that would be sensors that would make remote medical consultation actually useful. But that increases the number of devices that we might have in place, whether we're temporarily wearing them or actually embedding them in our bodies for whatever reason. So I think the demand for Internet address space is going to be dramatic. Last point, and again, reacting to some of the chat room conversation, the domain name system, of course, was invented to deal with scaling of the internet. But it's important to recognize that the existing architecture would allow for any number of different identifier spaces being mapped into IP addresses. We could do this in a variety of different ways. And so if someone wanted to explore alternative identification and mapping, that's entirely technically feasible. Deploying it and getting it in use is maybe a different story. Sustaining it with regard to any costs, again, another story. But I would argue that we don't need to start from ground zero. We only need to lay out what desirable properties we're looking for and ask, how do we achieve that? Thank you very much. I'm sorry I went on for rather a long time.
Thanks for this, Vint. And I guess the next part of our agenda, we should have reactions from other panelists. And I think we've already had plenty of reactions from everyone. And I also wanted to get reaction, because time is short, reaction from participants here. I've seen a lot of life on the chat now, and I'm glad that the chat has been opened up for everyone to post to everybody. But if you do have a question, comment, and so on, and you'd like to speak, I'm not sure the protocol for it, but if I know that the hosts are able to, there you go. You can put your hand up and the hosts are able to unmute you. So first we'll start with Andrew Valencia.
So hello everyone, my name is André Malacia from Portugal. First of all, because everyone is saying happy birthday to Vint, so happy birthday as well. And to actually mention IoT things, just to mention that Internet of Medical Things is something interesting, but a few years ago, probably 70 years ago, 50 to 70 years ago, we've already had that. It's called astronauts, which already have a lot of medical devices on them, so that can be considered IoT already. And if we have a massification of those devices on all people, and some of them already have watches that measure temperature and pulsation and things like that. So if we have a massification of that, I think, of course, we can reduce the amount of needs we have for our health services worldwide. Second question I want to mention, this is a completely different one, but let me just put this out for anyone to comment. Because of all of the virus things we had in the last few months, one of the affected things was also the internet, and especially cloud services, which had a very big peak, including things like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and other services had a big zoom as well, and specifically on all of the services that use IoT and send information to the cloud, that also affected the way that they worked. So one of the solutions people are seeing is more and more relevant at this moment is to try to do more edge computing. So to make sure that you can still do the same thing as you do sending the data to the cloud, still do that at the edge. That can even be controlled centrally by the cloud. So some providers are doing this, Microsoft and others are also doing this, so that can be a suggestion. I'm not going to make any comment about the new IP or anything like that. In maybe 5 years we'll talk about this. I just want to mention that we haven't yet fixed IPv6 yet, so hopefully this will be done. When IPv6 is done, we'll talk about the new IP. Okay, so thank you all, and please continue.
Thanks for this, Andre. Any comments from our panelists?
Well, with regards to let's do new IP when we're done with IPv6. Be careful what you wish for, but I'll take you on that challenge, Andre. See you in 2030.
Well, as you may have seen from my comment, I want end-to-end Ethernet. I just want the MAC addresses resolved. And as Vint knows, I'd love to see what happens with Bob Metcalf.
Why do we need MAC addresses in every packet?
If you find a way to build a global routing table of MAC addresses, I'm looking forward to your solution and a proof of concept.
I got a feeling Google's done it already.
Vince is staying silent, thinking, "Oh, little do you know."
I like Olaf's comment about broadcast storms from hell.
Okay, maybe we're delving too deep into tech, people. Let's say.
I think that comment is right, Marco. We are geeking out, and sorry, there's a plane.
So it's okay for you guys to geek out.
There's a question in the chat from Seva Subramanian. One of the claims by telecom firms in justification of their self-assumed right to control all communications is that they have invested in the infrastructure. Business firms from the internet side have also invested in infrastructure. Could there be coordinated efforts to cause the internet companies to increase their unconditional investments in global infrastructure, for example, in fiber, in technologies that support community internet networks, in P2P towers, in internet devices that may not have to work like telephones, etc.?
So may I jump in, Olivier, on this one? This is actually a very good point, and those of you who have been following the underlying physical infrastructure of the internet will have noticed a massive build out by some of the large internet companies, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and so on, have built their own networks. They are investing in undersea fiber. They are investing in access to data centers, access to internet exchange points. And so they are building out capacity connecting to the local internet access points of the typical carriers. And so the backbone of the internet has changed pretty dramatically from its early conception. There is parallel implementation from the major internet application providers all the way out to very close to the internet access edge. So it's already happening in some sense. And it's been driven by business and by efficiency needs. For example, Akamai, when it builds its system for content distribution, does so in order to reduce load across the backbone internet and improve quality of service for internet users. Subramanian's, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, it's Seva Subramanian, makes a point which is already materializing, and the relationships between the internet access providers and the internet application providers is already established in a strong peering relationship.
Yeah, I think there are, there are already parallel networks. I mean, internet exchanges themselves came in as a way of avoiding going through some of the other places that people otherwise had to go. And we kind of, we've got the mobile systems, and we've got the broadband, if you like, and those are kind of fairly separate systems, although there's a lot of talk of getting them to converge. But I mean, certainly in the UK, The last mile tends to be done by, well, even that's not entirely telecom firms, because I've got here we've got cable as well. So we've got phones and internet from the cable company, and we also have a phone and internet from the traditional telecom structure.
Does it, John? Does the internet, in your view, have to be based on TCP/IP, or it's just a network of networks with any protocol?
Yeah, to me, no, it doesn't have to be TCP/IP, but at the moment it all is. So, but ultimately, the job that it's doing is getting data packets from A to B.
And Tony,
sorry, it's Vint again. You just have to be able to identify A and B and have the network understand what that means, and then figure out a route from one to the other. So
right.
It doesn't have to be TCP/IP. In fact, it isn't always TCP/IP. TCP, UDP, HTTP, and RTP, and so on are all part of the picture. Even IP is not absolutely essential, although at the moment, if you don't use IP, it's very hard to figure out how you would express an endpoint in the network without every single device in the system having to change. And so I think we're kind of stuck for the moment with the IP address space. Again, a reason why IPv6 needs to be implemented just to allow for a larger termination point.
Olaf?
Yeah, another way of saying this is obviously, or of course, or maybe perhaps IP can be replaced by another protocol. We're trying hard. We're trying to replace IPv4 by IPv6. And the interfaces there are, the things that you have to change in the interface are relatively small, just a few more bits, and that's about it, so to speak. But we can see how difficult that is. I think what makes for an internet, and we've been talking about that for a long time in terms of the internet invariance. But another way of saying is that in order to have an internet, you have to have an open and accessible protocol. The openness for the permissionless innovation, and the accessibility in order for folk to grow it, in order for one party to connect to that network and make it bigger, being a part of it without having n-squared contracts to be signed. So open, accessible infrastructure and using a common protocol. And it doesn't really matter what, if that's IP or BLAFU, that doesn't matter. But we currently have IP, and that's where the network effect is. A layered architecture and offering common services. And the common services here is the global connectivity, and the layered architecture lets us have Elon Musk build its satellites. The common architecture lets us use 5G type of radio connections with high speed to the rest of the internet, and so on and so forth. I think what is important is that the decentralized routing and management. All networks are autonomous in this setup. They make their own business decisions, they make their own routing decisions. The global namespace is important. We all have to be able to find each other. And finally, the general purpose nature of the network is, I think, important. That's, to me, what makes an internet. And that, to me, is what IP currently provides. And most notably, some of the other architectures do not. If you look at new IP, it's clearly not a general purpose type of protocol. It is a multi-purpose protocol. That's how it's been marketed. So, and when I look at new IP or other proposals, that's the type of thing I'm thinking about. And I think that if we throw those properties away, we end up with a different world with different possibilities, with different control points, and and we have to be able to discuss those in open fora. The same with the current evolution of the internet, the consolidation that is happening. And Vint, what you just said is the fact that a few big companies can build infrastructure towards the customer is a sign of consolidation, is something that we have to discuss, and we can do so. We have now all the governance infrastructure in place in it to be able to address or at least talk about these features and these problems and these issues, and get everybody who has an interest involved in those discussions. And to me, that whole set is an important feature of what the internet is. Over and out.
Sorry, I didn't want to, you were on a discussion point there. I didn't want to cut you off. Paul, you have been asked a question actually here in the chat that is about how we are managing infrastructure being built out currently overwhelmingly by private companies and not public authorities. Is there a way to make the internet private instead of a public resource? That's from our chat.
Yeah, thanks. It's a good question. I think what we've seen is how private sector investment, private sector innovation, providing applications and services that drive customer demand, that's the model that's worked. And we've seen that in so many places around the world. That's not to say, of course, that governments don't have some really important roles to play. Governments need to create an enabling environment to allow that to happen, encouraging investments, promoting competition and good regulation. And there are many examples where you need to have public and private partnerships for major infrastructure investment. And of course, governments have to respond to different market conditions. There's no one model here. So that could mean using universal service and access funds. In some of the least developed countries, it might really come down to using development aid in countries where you can't, for example, rely on a consistent electricity supply, or there just is no basic infrastructure. So you need different models for different circumstances. And governments definitely have different roles to play. But we know that the long-term consistent model that is going to drive progress and drive success will be private sector investment, providing applications and services that drive customer demand. That's what works.
Thank you. That's a great perspective on all of this. So we understand that we have been allotted an extra 5 minutes because this group loves dialogue. We're going to ask each one of the panelists, if kind of a lightning round, if you want to do a 30-second response to something or just a final thought, and then we're going to close this out by at 5 minutes after the hour. Paul, you want to start since you were last on deck here?
Yeah, thanks. Just very briefly, it's been a great discussion. I've learned a lot, and my geekiness has grown a tiny little bit from small beginnings, but still very interesting stuff. I would just link maybe the beginning of the conversation we had about COVID-19 with this question of a new IP, because I think the attention that there is now at much more senior levels around how important internet is to public services and infrastructure does really mean that when we are talking about either new IP or developments of existing IP, there is so much more senior attention to the implications of that. They're more than just technical geeky implications. They're really fundamental implications that affect all of us. And I think going forward, we are going to see much greater engagement and participation by governments in these kinds of conversations. And that's probably a good thing. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very valid point. Marco, any final comments?
Yeah, well, with Paul, like tying the two ends together, we kind of initiated this discussion around like, okay, we should make sure that everybody has connectivity. It should be affordable. That's been an ongoing discussion in IGF and also in Eurodic, ensuring affordable connectivity for all. And looking back now, and I think in the last discussion we had regarding investment, we also have to consider that sort of redoing it all will cost a ginormous amount of money, and we're already struggle getting the investments done to expand our IP install base. I don't even want to think what happens if we have to sort of restart it from scratch. So that's something to take away and think about maybe when you go home, or basically you walk back from your laptop to your sofa tonight. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Olaf, final thoughts?
Not really, but I was thinking about something that Peter Koch said somewhere in the chat. IP
There's
might not be the
digest there.
yeah, IP might not be the best thing, but that we have, but it's the best thing that we have.
Okay.
And I, you know, I am very sensitive to the fact that in lots of IT environments you have very special network requirements, and that we need to be inventive and innovative about that. But I do really want to stress that there is a thing like an internet, even though Tony doesn't believe me and think I'm of a different planet. There is a thing that is an internet, and I think it is up to us to make sure that we keep the capabilities of it.
Great. David?
Yeah, so I largely agree with what Olaf said. You know, I think, you know, the internet, if you define it a particular way, will never meet everyone's requirements. It helps address a large number of people's requirements. It is not perfect in any sense of the word, but it is good enough to allow us to have the communication network upon which we're actually talking here. I think that we need to be careful to not allow ourselves to be drawn into polemics and politics because of the special cases that, you know, are perhaps not ideal for the internet protocol suite as it exists, but look to see how we can evolve those protocols to address those cases or replace them. You know, one of the nice things about the internet is it provides a common medium that can allow interconnections of islands for those special cases. So ultimately, you know, I think COVID-19 has shown that the internet can address a lot of the concerns that individuals and governments might have. It also has shown where those the problems that can be derived out of that. You know, very early on, there was a mention of DNS abuse, and it's been known that there has been a surge in the registrations of domain names related to COVID-19, with an assumption that those domain names were then used for malicious purposes. It turns out in practice that most weren't, the vast majority weren't. But it does highlight the need to understand more about the dynamics of how the systems are actually being used and how they will be used, particularly by the bad guys moving forward.
Thank you. Vint, final thoughts?
Sorry, it took a moment to unmute.
Okay.
Well, I think we have, if you look back over the last 45 years and you look at the things we could not do in the early stages of internet and the things that we can now do today, I would argue that that's a pretty good picture, and that we still have plenty of room to grow from the functional point of view and from the capacity point of view. We still lack internet access for half of the planet. We have that huge investment that Elon Musk is making, and which I hope actually works with the satellite capability, yet another alternative way of getting access to a common communications infrastructure. And while I don't think we should simply pat ourselves on the back and be done with it, I think we have enormous amounts of opportunity, and to say nothing of a lot of brilliant people, some of whom are right here on this call, to help us move forward to increase the capability of the internet to meet more demand. So I'm hugely optimistic about what's possible.
Thanks. John, final thoughts?
Yeah, thing I want to sort of pick up on is that we were talking about the move to IPv6. and why that's taken so long. And I think part of the reason is that although, originally all the looking at packets was done in software. So, hey, why don't switches just download some new software to handle IPv6 packets? Actually, on the line card, there is stuff that's baked into silicon, which expects to find IPv4 addresses. So you actually need new silicon to handle IPv6, and that's something that's kind of not obvious when we're talking about the protocols, but when you get to the point of someone being told, okay, to do this, you have to throw that kit out and get some other kit in, that's where it starts being a problem. And so for anything new, we need to worry about the migration path.
Thanks. Tony, final thoughts?
Yes, so let's see, I guess I'm live. So I tried to anticipate this closing with my second slide, and to quote Jack Ryan, I'm just an analyst. I don't have any particular horse in this. I participate probably in 40 or 50 different venues, both as a technologist and a lawyer. And I love just watching what's going on. And what I tried to provide you in that last slide is my best summary of what I think is going on today and what the implications are. So the good news is we're evolving these new network infrastructures and services. They're going to be NFV-SDN-based orchestrations. There's a whole bunch of venues that are basically churning that stuff out massively. And it will enable a new world of protocol innovation and architectures. I think it's an unbelievably fascinating time, unlike anything we've seen. I think the compliance obligations across multiple jurisdictions are going to need attention. And as I've been writing, Google is just beautifully set up here. AI coupled with a new means of identification, discovery, address resolution, and path connections to endpoints desired by customers will emerge as an increasingly significant market, but rife with potential anti-competitive concerns. That's a really big issue. There are relatively few people dealing with it. And the principal challenges and potential solutions revolve around public international law for extraterritorial instantiations and wearing my legal hat. That's going to be fascinating to watch. So Great. That's it for me.
Thank you. Thank you all for all of your really exuberant participation. I'm going to hand it back to Olivier to close us out.
Thanks very much, Shane. And, I could spend another half an hour, if not hour, listening to all to more of these discussions. It's unfortunate that we have to close now. Today, we've really heard that the internet is somehow today fit for purpose. We've convened to disagree on some points regarding the internet in 2030. And I'd like to invite you all to perhaps have a future discussion again, because this is not the alpha and omega of these discussions. It's great to have seen such an interesting panel with various views. Certainly, we're looking at different models for different circumstances. We're looking at, okay, what we have today is good enough. Tomorrow, we're not quite sure whether it will be good enough, but we're hoping that it will be, and thanks to the brains of the people around the world working on this network and on other parallel works, we can all come up with a network or something that will be fit for purpose in 2030. And with this, I think I need to give the floor over to the Eurodic studio. And thank you, everyone, for attending. This has been really interesting.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Olivier and Shane, for moderating. Thank you to all the speakers. And before you go, I have a special treat for you because we are not closing this room right away, but I can hand it over to Sandra Hofer-Richter, who will join us in a second and wrap up the day for all of us.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Elizabeth, for, that's not Elizabeth, that's Olivier on my screen. Thank you all for this session. Overrunning is always a good sign so that the discussion was
Uh-oh.
Someone muted Sandra.
Sorry, that was me.
Okay, so let's start again. Thank you, Elisabeth, for hosting that studio today, and glad to see now you, to thank you that you hosted that room. I think you did a remarkable job. Overrunning a session is always a good sign, because then basically the discussion was a good one. And I hope everyone has enough energy for tomorrow. We do, and I just would like to share a very funny moment of today with you. We have a Telegram messenger here in order to react in emergencies. And one of these little emergencies just happened in the last hour. And with the permission of my colleagues, I'm allowed to read what happens. It's about Vint Cerf. Is Vint still in the room, or did he leave already? Did he left already?
Oh,
He's still in.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me read out. One said, Vint Cerf is in the wrong session. Please direct him to Studio Berlin. I send him a private message. Thank you. I have contacted Vin by chat in my session. Vint is still in your session with a raised hand? He's not here, definitely. He has raised hand in my session. I will give him the floor when the current speaker is finished. Vint is moving to Berlin now. Thanks, he has arrived. Normally, that would take 8 hours by train. That's an advantage of a virtual meeting. And then the funny last question about this was from, where was it? Sandra, when was Vint in the wrong room, before or after? So this basically happens only, I think, with a virtual meeting, and we hope to continue with such pleasure tomorrow. Rooms will open 30 minutes in advance, so you can enter the room at 9 p.m. We will start with our session sharp at 9:30, and we recommend you to come in early, because we have 1,200 registrations, and getting everyone online, we hope there will no glitches. So just join a little bit earlier, that you don't miss the start. And with this, I wish you a very nice evening, and I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow and the day after. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks to our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Tony.
Thanks for organizing.
Thank you, Paul.